What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball Podcast. I am your host, Troll Bro Dude, and oh my god, we are in the thick of slop season right now. I had no idea what we were going to talk about today, and luckily, a lot of shit went down. So, Sam, you don't even know this, so Sam will be hearing this live on the air. Two things that I don't really think are shocking, but the first one was reported by Chris Haynes just now on his podcast with Mark Stein, and that is the Philadelphia 76ers and the Los Angeles Lakers are expected to be interested in one Hawks guard Dejounte Murray.
Oh, no.
So
no. Trill, is this the worst thing that's ever happened to you in your life?
I felt personally attacked.
Yeah.
I've been coping with it ever since, trying to figure out some sort of logic behind this. Everyone who listens knows I'm not the biggest fan of DeJounte's game. I don't really think that he fits on winning teams. And the logic that I've had said to myself before this was, if they were to trade for DeJounte, I would talk myself into it as like, okay, well, this is like an Aaron Gordon type situation where he was just on rat teams and in bad situations with stars he didn't fit with, and he just needs the right fit. And the more I think about that, the more I'm just like, I still have a hard time talking myself into it. And then Will actually reached out to me, and he said he comped it more so to the Spencer Dinwiddie trade a few years ago when he went to the Mavericks. And everyone was like, oh, Spencer Dinwiddie's a loser. He has bad vibes. And then he went to the Mavericks, and they made the conference finals. He shot very well in the playoffs. He was a good fit working off of Luka. And as a secondary guy in a starting lineup, he might be more workable when he's playing off of stars that have gravity like Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. I could maybe see it, but I'm still kind of at the point where, like, if the Lakers are the only other team interested in DeJounte, if this is a real report and we are to believe it, if the Lakers are the only other team interested in DeJounte Murray, what does the price tag look like? Because the Lakers have nothing to trade except for one first-round pick that's very far out. And then they also have a bunch of contracts that are not expiring. They have no expiring contracts. All of their contracts go into next year, like Rui Hachimura, D'Lo, Jared Vanderbilt, all those guys. So unless they want those players, which I have a hard time seeing them being super interested in any of those players, considering it's a Trae Young-led team, I don't like, the Sixers' interest might be to the point where it's just, we're interested if we could basically get him for free.
Yeah, right. And I think that's it. You know, like I think that might just be where the price tag is. The other thing I could think is, if it is a Tobias Harris framework, maybe it's for DeJounte Murray and Bogdanovich.
Now we're cooking. We're cooking. Yeah. But the problem with that, and a lot of people have suggested that to me too, is like, well, if you can get Bogdan back, I'm like, so we're trading a power forward for two guards when, look, I'm not like gung-ho about the idea of going into the playoffs with DeAnthony Melton as the starting shooting guard. I think he's probably best as a third guard off the bench. But you're making your team, you're leaning into a smaller version of yourself. And I do think that despite some of Tobias's struggles in the playoffs before, that size is a good thing to have when you're going into the playoffs. And you're making your team a lot smaller if that is the case. Now, the positive of that is you're possibly ramping up Oubre, Batum, all of these other guys' minutes. I just have a harder time seeing Atlanta doing that kind of trade unless they get blown away with an offer. I think they'll probably piecemeal that, where they'll do one DeJounte trade and one Bogdan trade to extract maximum value out of the trade. But if there is no market for DeJounte, which honestly, it doesn't really sound like anyone but the Lakers are interested, maybe you can get off the money like you did with John Collins and then get two decent first-round picks from the Sixers. And then it's like, all right, well, now you look at your team and you go, okay, we're stacking up on picks. Because what Jake Fisher said in his article today is that is exactly what we said last episode. The Hawks are open to tanking this season. They know they're not going anywhere. They only have their pick this year. They want to try to get a difference maker in there with Trey and Jalen Johnson. And Bogdan is really the one that has the most value to teams, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. They're doing what the like Raptors should have, where you look at it and you're like, okay, we don't have our horses. Capella, Bogdanovich, Murray, if we can, like, and we just reset around our, our good guys in Okongwu, Jalen Johnson, and Trae Young. And Okongwu, I'm being charitable, throwing him in there, but like hypothetically, so
they probably like him.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I think that's interesting. I have such a hard time with Dejounte Murray's like value, because the other thing about Dejounte Murray is his real value is that he's 18 million this year and then it goes up. You know what I'm saying? Like
trading for him now.
Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't really matter to the Sixers. It would matter a lot more to the Lakers, for example, than it would for the Sixers. But again, like you said, they don't really have that much to trade. Like, it's like Jalen Hood-Schifino, who God even knows if he's an asset, and that
I wouldn't even first round pick. I would have more interest in Max Christie if I'm the Hawks. Jalen Hood-Schifino's but Jalen Hood-Schifino is, at least Max Christie was good in college and in summer league. Jalen Hood-Schifino has literally never been good at any level of college or professional basketball.
Yeah.
I mean we called that on
draft pick. Yeah, I was gonna say that's why we didn't like him in the draft. Yeah. I mean, but like, there is like, you do have the control. You know what I'm saying? You see what you can get with some of these guys. Like, the good thing about having Trae Young on your team is it's kind of like a Rosetta Stone for being able to figure out who's good. Like, because if you can't make it with Trae Young, like getting you the ball, you're probably not going to make it. It's part of the reason I've always liked Jalen. I thought Jalen Johnson always popped like on those teams, because I could see him playing off of Trae Young, and I was like, oh, okay, like he's got like some balance. He like doesn't look out of place. So it's so bizarre to me, like what the value is, and I just have such a hard time feeling that like a player that was traded. Was that literally a year and a half ago for like 3 first-round picks and a swap or whatever the fuck it was? Like, is just going to be like
2 first-round picks and a swap. The one was fake, but yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. And he's just going to get like salary dumped. Like, is that?
I mean, the thing that I go back to is last year in the playoffs, Dejounte misses game 5 in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
The Hawks win that game. And then going into that game, if you looked at the on-off numbers, they were winning the Dejounte Murray minutes going into that game without Trae Young. So it's clear that those two were just an awful fit together. Like, it's just it is part of like the your turn, my turn thing, but also we know what kind of players fit around Trae. It looks more like that team that made a run a few years ago, and they got lucky with matchups and stuff, but we know like big athletic lob catching guys who can finish plays around him, added in with some really maximized shooting with Kevin Huerter and Bogdan Bogdanovich, and you can catch the right matchup and make a run. Whereas this, like Dejounte just takes the ball out of Trae Young's hands. He's not really super, like, he's not a great catch and shoot guy. The defense, like his off-ball defense is not good, and you just can't pair that guy with Trae Young. Like, Trae needs stout defenders around him that can finish plays on the other end.
Can I tell you what my package would be if I were the Hawks and I was trying to trade Murray?
Mm-hmm.
I would say, here's Murray.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to need 1 to 2 first-round picks, depending on the quality,
mm-hmm.
and you're taking DeAndre Hunter because Jalen Johnson is next up, and we owe him $80 million.
That's where it gets really tough for me. Like, we just saw the same thing happen with
Barrett,
Quickly and Barrett. But the difference is that Quickly hasn't signed that contract yet, so they'll get to negotiate with him this offseason. And also, in theory, Quickly has more upside than a player like Dejounte. But to be fair to Dejounte, he has made an all-star team before. Like
that's like the absolute ceiling for Quickly.
Yeah. And the thing that I've always liked more about Quickly than I liked about Dejounte, despite like the height difference, is the fact that he plays actively off of the ball and he tries. He's really good in a team context on both offense and defense. And that is something that I've always struggled with Dejounte. I feel like he's kind of been more of an empty stats player to this point in his career. And I'm not saying there isn't a perfect situation. Like, I think that you probably could find it. I think we landed on, like, the Jazz being a decent situation for him with all their spacing and guys who move the ball and stuff. But I'm still kind of to the point where, like, if I'm Atlanta, I agree. Like, I would be looking to get off that. I would be looking to get positive value back for Bogdanovich and Capella, who still have some juice and can work on good teams. And then I would be looking to potentially trade Hunter's contract in addition to just basically trying to clear my books as much as possible. Because right now, like you said, they have Okongwu on a pretty decent contract. They have Trae Young. They have Jalen Johnson, who has not signed his extension. And I don't think you're ever going to be able to get free agents in Atlanta, but it's just better to be in a position where you have a ton of cap space, whether you're taking on contracts to get picks or you're trying to figure out a way to have a pathway to putting a better team around Trae. It's just better to have cap space. And the other thing I do just want to say about this is that every time there's a trade, like, oh, this person wants a trade, that person wants a trade, the Sixers are the first team that gets mentioned. It's the Lakers and the Sixers because they, like you've put it out before, everyone knows the Lakers need to make a trade. They do every year, and it's always a desperation move that potentially could save their team about halfway through the year. And then in addition to that, the other part of it to me is the Sixers are the team with the contracts, the cap space this offseason, the picks, and they're contending. So they are the team that could be used by Clutch, which is what people pointed out in the Discord, and used by the Hawks front office to drum up an interest in players around the league. Because the other teams that we've heard, it's basically the Knicks, the Lakers, and the Sixers are the three teams that have been used for everyone. The Knicks just made a big trade for a player that the Sixers were apparently interested in, OG Anunoby. And now you have Mark Stein. So if anyone doesn't really know the background with Mark Stein, Mark is a guy who's gotten a lot of things wrong about the Sixers before, but that was with old front offices. This front office, he has famously gotten things wrong, but every time he gets them wrong, it's always kind of in the favor of the Sixers, if that makes sense. Like, he said they were really close to getting James Harden, but Houston wouldn't trade him to Daryl Morey. He said that the Sixers were really close to getting Lowry, but Masai was asking for way too much. And now he's saying, well, the Sixers have no interest in Dejounte Murray. They have no interest in Pascal Siakam. They have no interest in Zach LaVine. And they want cap space for this summer. He keeps saying that over and over and over again. And I'm like, this is directly from Daryl Morey, dude. Like, yeah. Also, in addition to that, earlier this year when Halliburton had his crazy game against the Sixers, he reported after that Halliburton was never on the table for the Sixers. And then I was like, it's very obvious Daryl Morey is leaking directly to Mark Stein, or at least someone close to Daryl Morey. Right. So I don't buy this. I don't buy that that Mark Stein, who pushed back that the Sixers weren't interested in LaVine or Siakam or Dejounte. I think that they're honestly kind of I think they're in a mode right now where they have a bunch of options and they don't want to marry themselves to anyone, and they want to gauge the price. And from what I've heard over the last 24 hours is that they're not even fully out on Zach LaVine. Like, if the price comes down and it's basically like, we'll take Zach LaVine off your hands and maybe we'll throw you that fake first that we got in the Harden trade, they might be willing to take back Zach LaVine. I think they're keeping all of their options open, and they're not going to marry themselves to one person or one player so that they can basically see what's the best deal we can get out of this for this year and long term, because they know they're not going to get, unless they get insight between now and the trade deadline that, like, Paul George wants to come here in the offseason, the cap space plan is not real. They're only doing that if a star has interest in coming to the Sixers. They are going to be aggressive trying to get players at this deadline, and I think that they're going to end up walking away with, I don't know if it's a big name, but they're going to walk away with at least one or two rotation players that will play for them in the playoffs.
Also, I'd just like to point out that if they were to trade, if the Hawks were to trade with anyone, they're getting a traded player exception. I just want to remind everyone of that there is a giant traded player exception going on for anyone who's
25 million, you said?
23, something like that.
23 million. Okay, so the Sixers trade Marcus Morris into that trade exception.
Yes.
And then Dejounte comes back, and then you get there you go, perfect.
Yep.
That's
perfect.
I'm kind of with, if they said you have to take Dejounte and Hunter, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. If they say you take Dejounte and Bogdan and then we'll negotiate from there, I'm way more open to that. And
I think that's got to be like 3 picks though in that deal.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I would do 2 first-round picks. I don't. Yeah. I would not. I would do 2. I would say we'll take on the Dejounte contract, and we'll give you 2 picks for him and Bogdan. I'm not doing anything more than that. The last thing I'll say about this, the outgoing salary in this trade will probably not be Tobias Harris, as we discussed on the last thing. But if they're really interested in Dejounte Murray, he should be the outgoing salary, because he's the one that doesn't fit with the new team. If you're able to trade for Dejounte Murray, who's a similar player to Tobias, and that's where I think that would kind of be the difference. Whereas if you're just trading for Dejounte, you could do it literally with just Marcus Morris' salary, or like Jaden Springer and Marcus Morris.
Have the Sixers ever been vulnerable from a rebounding standpoint with Embiid? Has that ever happened?
Last year, yeah. They were a bad rebounding team until this year, basically.
Interesting. Okay.
The fact that's why they went out and they got Oubre and they got Batum and they got and they're playing a little bit differently too. They crash the glass more often, and Embiid's been more active on the glass as well. But they know that's an area that's an issue for them, and Nurse is big on rebounding in general.
I just feel like you could downgrade. I don't know. Like, I feel like Paul Reed's a pretty good rebounder from what I've seen for his size, especially. Like, it seems like he gets a lot of contested rebounds, and like, I guess I never really noticed with Embiid, and like, is Tobias like all that great of a rebounder?
No,
like,
Tobias is not a good. Tobias is one of those guys where you look at he's kind of like we were talking about with Daniel Gafford, where like, Daniel Gafford averages 8 rebounds a game. But if you look at the team rebounding stats, they're actually bad at rebounding when he's on the court. Tobias is the same way in terms of he might have individual good rebounding seasons, but as a team rebounder, he's pretty bad, which actually is kind of why he works better as a 3 in some ways, even though he's not ideally a 3. Because 3s, you don't expect 3s to rebound as well as 4s, and that from that standpoint, he's not good rebounder for a 4, to put it bluntly. But I kind of think that's not really going to be as much of an issue because of the way that they play now. Like, Embiid being removed from the paint, they have guys crash the glass way more often. 2 years ago in the Heat series is where it really killed us, because the Heat live and die on the glass. And this year, I'm like, I think they're like top 10 in rebounding on both sides this season. So I wouldn't really worry about that.
Yeah, so I guess to that point, like, I think they could do this, because I think the bigger challenge with part of what makes the Hawks fit so bad is you need shooting. And the Sixers do have guys, they have a lot of rangy wing size and guys who can shoot. So they could, it's really just the Embiid, Maxey, like, that's the thing that kills me, is because like those guys are so good. I like don't want to give away 25 to 30% usage to fucking Dejounte, and other guys like Oubre.
You'd have to know that he, that's what I'm saying, is like, you'd have to know that they buy into a role. And that's, if they trade for Levine, if they trade for Dejounte, which I don't think you can realistically say is an impossible thing. I think both of those guys are still, Daryl Morey, if he sees value in someone and they're at their lowest point of their value, he's not going to say no if he thinks he can make the fit work. And Nick Nurse is going to figure out a way to make them useful. But they have to know before they come here, you're the third guy on offense. And if they don't want to buy into that, then you don't trade for them. That's kind of where I've always been in this situation, where like I would even prefer to get guys that are more like Bogdanovich, Dorian Finney-Smith, if Cam Johnson became available, those kind of guys. But I understand if they are going to trade for them, it's going to be known. Just like when LeBron teams trade for someone, or the Warriors traded for Andrew Wiggins. Like, they knew, like, you're not going to be the guy here, and I think that's a good thing for you. And if they want to buy into that, like Aaron Gordon and Wiggins and all those guys did, great. And if they don't, then don't be interested in them. I think that's just kind of how good teams should operate.